The space station Meridian 7 was the largest structure in the outer galaxy. It hung in the black void like a giant metal flower, with long arms reaching out in all directions. Inside, the Galactic Council was gathering for their annual treaty summit. Princess Liana of the Etherian Collective stepped off the transport ship and felt her chest tighten. The station was enormous and crowded with alien species from across the known universe. Their voices echoed through the metal corridors. Their strange bodies moved with purpose and confidence. They all seemed to know exactly where they were going. Liana did not. She was young for a diplomat, only 230 cycles old. Her people, the Etherians, were quiet beings who preferred to watch and listen rather than speak. They lived on worlds of soft blue oceans and glowing crystal forests. They did not build warships or command armies. They built gardens and wrote poetry and tried to understand the hearts of others. Her father, the High Council member of her people, had selected her for this summit. He believed it was time for a young Etherian to take a place among the galaxy's decision-makers. Liana had protested. She was not ready. She did not have the strength of the Varth warriors or the brilliant minds of the Keshtar collective. But her father had been firm. Change had to begin somewhere. Now, as she walked through the station's main corridor, she wondered if he had made a mistake. The other delegates moved around her like water flowing around a stone. A tall, crystalline being with faceted skin turned without looking at her. His name was Varth, and he led the Vorth delegation. The Varth were known for their pride and their love of profit. They took what they wanted and rarely asked permission. Behind him came the Thorn commander, Krell. His species was built for war. His skin was thick and dark as iron. His eyes held no warmth. The Thorn Empire had conquered 7 star systems. They were not beings who understood the word no. The Keshtar floated through the corridor as a group, their bodies connected by invisible mental bonds. They communicated without speaking, their thoughts moving between them like wind through trees. They were wise and ancient, but they had also learned that neutrality was safer than taking sides. Liana tried to stand tall as she walked. Her robes were made from the finest materials her people could craft. They shimmered with pale blue and silver thread. Around her shoulders, she wore the symbol of her family, a small pendant that glowed with soft bioluminescence. It was beautiful, but it was not powerful. It did not command fear or respect. She made her way to the council chamber and found her seat. It was at the back of the room, far from the main table where the important delegates sat. The Varth occupied the front positions. The Thorn commander had a massive chair built to support his weight. Even the smaller species like the Krull and the Merith had better seats than hers. Liana sat in her assigned place and waited. The opening ceremony began with speeches from the major powers. Vareth spoke about expanding trade routes and increasing profit margins. Commander Krell spoke about security and protection. The Keshtar leader, who could only be heard by those around him through telepathy, made vague statements about maintaining peace through understanding that no one asked the Etherians about anything. When the first session moved into discussion of trade agreements, Liana opened the datapad she had prepared. She had worked for 3 full cycles on this information. She had gathered statistics about fair pricing, environmental impact studies, and historical data about successful partnerships between the Etherians and other species. She raised her hand. No one noticed. She raised it higher. Still nothing. Vorth delegate was speaking about a new mining operation. Liana tried to interrupt politely, saying that the mining would damage an ecosystem that relied on careful balance. Her voice was not loud. The Vorth never even glanced at her. He continued speaking as if she had not made a sound. Varth leaned over and actually stepped on the corner of her data pad with one of his crystalline feet. The pad fell to the floor. He looked at it with confusion, as if he did not understand how it had gotten there. And then he stepped over it and kept walking. He did not even realize he had almost stepped on her. Liana picked up her datapad and sat back in her seat. Her bioluminescent markings, which normally glowed a soft blue, faded to almost nothing. When an Etherian was upset or afraid, their light dimmed. It was something they could not control. The rest of the day continued the same way. When Liana tried to speak, her voice disappeared into the noise of the chamber. When she tried to make eye contact with other delegates, they looked through her as if she was not there. A Thoran guard nearly knocked her over in the corridor and did not bother to apologize. A Varith engineer made a joke about the Etherians being too quiet to matter, and everyone around him laughed. By the end of the first session, Liana felt hollow inside. Why had she come? Why had her father sent her? She was nothing here. She was less than nothing. She was invisible. That evening, she could not bear to eat in the main dining area where the other delegates gathered. Instead, she found her way to the botanical gardens, a section of the station where plants from 1,000 different worlds grew together in one massive chamber. The gardens were quiet. The lights were dimmed to simulate the night cycles of 12 different planets. The air smelled of growing things and moisture. It was the only place on the station where Liana felt like she could breathe. She found a bench made of smooth stone and sat down. Around her, flowers bloomed in colors she had no names for. Vines twisted through the air. Trees that had no roots reached toward the sky through some force of will or science she did not understand. She sat there alone as the hours passed. Her bioluminescent markings flickered with sadness. Little tears formed at the corners of her eyes. She tried to stop them. It was not proper for a delegate of her people to cry. But the tears came anyway, falling silently into the strange dirt of the alien garden. She was still crying, very quietly. When someone found her sitting there, it was a human. Liana had never seen a human before. She had read the reports. Humans had recently joined the galactic community. They were young as a species, still primitive by the standards of most advanced cultures. They were emotional and unpredictable. Most alien species treated them with polite distance, the way one might treat an interesting animal that could not be fully understood. But this human was different. He sat down beside her on the bench, and he did not sit too close. He did not ask questions. He simply sat there, and he was present. And when he finally spoke, his words were simple and true. "Rough day?" he said. "I could tell. Everyone was ignoring you in there. I'm David, by the way. I'm feeling invisible too." Liana looked at him with surprise. He had noticed her. Even though she was invisible to everyone else, this human had seen her. David Harrison was a captain in the Human Space Service. He had been sent to the Galactic Council as Earth's official observer. The position was not important. Everyone made this very clear to him. He was there to learn, to watch, and to stay quiet. Humans were still new to galactic politics. Most of the established powers did not take them seriously. They had a point. Humans had only been traveling between the stars for 30 years. They still made mistakes. They spoke out of turn. They got emotional over things the more advanced species saw as simple business transactions. Commander Crow of the Thorn Empire had actually laughed when David introduced himself that morning. It was not a warm laugh. David had spent most of the first day standing in the back of the council chamber, just watching. He listened to the speeches and tried to understand the complex systems of trade and power that held the galaxy together. He noticed how the Varith always supported each other. He noticed how the Keshtar never disagreed with anyone strong. He noticed how the small species, the ones with no military force and no vast resources, were ignored completely. He noticed the Etherian princess sitting alone at the back of the chamber. He had read the briefing report about her. Princess Liana of the Etherian Collective. Young. First diplomatic mission. Her people were known for being peaceful and analytical. They made beautiful art and advanced medicine. But they had no weapons. They had no leverage. In galactic politics, this meant they had no voice. He watched her try to speak. He saw her hand go up. He felt the pain of being ignored because he knew that feeling. He was not so far removed from her situation. They were both new here. They were both invisible dot, so when his obligation to observe the evening session ended, he followed the path he had seen her take. He found her in the botanical gardens, sitting on a stone bench with tears on her face. The human instinct was to comfort. Most advanced species had learned to suppress this instinct because it was not logical or efficient. But humans still had it. They could not ignore someone who was suffering. David sat beside her and said nothing at first. He knew that sometimes the best thing a person could do was simply be present with someone else. He had learned this from his own mother, who had taught him that sometimes people did not need words. They needed to know they were not alone. When he finally spoke, he introduced himself and acknowledged what he had seen. He was honest about his own feelings of not belonging. And Liana, who had expected judgment or pity, found instead genuine understanding. She looked at his hand resting on the bench. Among her people, touch was a significant thing. It meant trust and acceptance. She watched as he slowly moved his hand closer, creating space for her to choose to touch him or not. It was a very human way of showing respect. Liana placed her hand close to his, and they sat that way in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but in the quiet of the gardens, David could hear every word. She told him about the Etherians. She explained how her people had always been explorers of ideas rather than conquerors of worlds. They built knowledge and beauty, but they had never built weapons. This made them weak in a galaxy where strength was measured in military might. She told him about her father's hope that she would help change how other species saw the Etherians. She told him how she had failed on her first day. David listened without interrupting. He asked questions that showed he was truly interested in her words. When she finished, he said something that surprised her. "On Earth, we have something called compassion," he said. "It means caring about another person's experience even when they are different from you. It means seeing someone when everyone else looks away. Humans have been shaped by a harsh world. Earth has dangerous weather and animals that could kill us. We are not the strongest species on our own planet, but we survived because we take care of each other. We stand together, and we refuse to accept that some people matter less than others just because they have less power." Liana asked him what this had to do with being noticed in the galactic community. David smiled. "I think it means that humans might actually be valuable in ways that other species have not considered. We might be valuable because we care about justice. We might be valuable because we see people like you, and we cannot accept that you are treated as if you do not matter." They talked through the night. Liana told David about her dreams for her people. She wanted the Etherians to have a voice in the galaxy. She wanted to prove that strength came in many forms. She wanted to show that wisdom and careful thought could be just as powerful as weapons and conquest. David told her about Earth. He told her about the long history of his people fighting against injustice. He told her that some of the greatest moments in human history came when ordinary people stood up for what was right. Even when it was difficult and dangerous, as the hours passed and the gardens around them slowly shifted toward morning light, something changed between them. Liana's bioluminescent markings grew brighter. She stopped looking at her feet and made direct eye contact with David. She asked him questions about himself. She smiled for the first time. When the night cycle ended and morning began to arrive, David said, "I know tomorrow will still be difficult. The council is not going to suddenly respect your voice because you had one good conversation with a human. But I want you to know that you are not invisible. Not to me. And I do not think you are invisible to yourself anymore either. Liana looked at their hands, still close but not quite touching. She said, "Among my people, we have something similar to compassion. We call it heart feeling. It is when you can sense the truth in another being. I can sense your truth, David. You are saying these things because you believe them. You are not trying to make me feel better with false promises. You are simply acknowledging what is real. And what is real is that I was drowning and you threw me a rope." David finally let his hand touch hers. It was a simple contact, just skin against skin, but it meant something significant. "Then tomorrow," David said, "we will both go back into that council chamber. You will try again to be heard. And this time, I will not look away when they try to ignore you. I will be your witness. I will confirm that you were here, that you spoke, and that your words matter." They left the gardens as the sun came up on the station's artificial cycles. They had only known each other for one night, but something had shifted in the universe. The invisible princess had been seen. The insignificant human captain had found purpose. Neither of them knew that their small action, born from genuine compassion and honest connection, would start a chain of events that would change the course of galactic politics forever. The third day of the summit began with heavy tension in the air. Commander Krell of the Thorn Empire had prepared a new proposal, and everyone could feel that something important was about to happen. The chamber filled quickly with delegates from all the major powers. Vareth and his Vorith advisors took their front row seats. The Keshtar floated in their usual positions, their minds already communicating before the session officially began. Liana entered the chamber and found her seat at the back. But this time, she was not alone. David stood near the wall where observers were permitted to stand. When Liana looked at him, he nodded. She straightened her back slightly and prepared herself. Commander Krell approached the main platform. His massive frame cast a shadow across the entire chamber. When he spoke, his voice was deep and certain, the voice of someone who had never been told no. "I present to you a proposal for the Unified Resource Extraction and Trade Agreement," he announced. "This agreement will benefit all participating species equally. We will establish mining operations across the outer territories. We will share resources and increase commerce. Everyone will prosper." He displayed the details of the agreement on the chamber screens. Liana's datapad began to process the information automatically, analyzing the terms and calculations. Within seconds, her analysis was complete, and what she saw made her afraid. The agreement was not fair. The Thorn Empire and their allies would control the most profitable mining operations. The smaller species would be contracted as labor forces. The resources they collected would be paid for at artificially low prices. Over the course of 20 cycles, this agreement would transfer almost all the wealth of the smaller species directly into Thorin and Voreth hands. It was exploitation dressed up in the language of partnership. Liana looked at David again. He was watching the delegates, observing their reactions. She saw that he understood what she understood. The agreement was wrong. Vareth spoke first. "This is excellent business strategy," he said. "The Vareth support this proposal completely. We see great profit opportunity." The Keshtar leader did not speak out loud, but his telepathic message was clear through the universal translation system. He would not oppose the agreement. Neutral meant not taking sides. Neutral meant accepting what powerful species decided. Other smaller species began to shift nervously in their seats. The Mirith looked to each other with fear. The Kelran, who were known for their gentle nature, seemed to shrink in size. The Etherian delegation in the chamber, though small, looked directly at Liana with expressions that showed their worry. Commander Krell was smiling. The agreement was going to pass. Everyone in the chamber knew it, but then David stepped forward from his position as an observer. No one had expected this. Observers did not participate in council decisions. It was forbidden in the protocols. Krell turned to him with actual amusement. "The human wishes to speak?" he asked. His tone made it clear he found the idea ridiculous. David did not ask permission. He simply began to speak. His voice was calm and steady, but everyone in the chamber could hear the conviction behind it. "I have reviewed this agreement carefully," David said. "I have compared it to the founding principles of the Galactic Council. And I have to tell you that this agreement violates almost every principle this council was created to protect." Varth laughed. Several other delegates joined him. A primitive human lecturing them about galactic law was humorous to them. But David continued. He pointed out specific clauses. He showed mathematical proofs of how the smaller species would be exploited. He spoke about history and how such agreements had led to conflict and suffering in human civilization. He talked about justice and fairness not as emotional concepts, but as practical necessities for a functional society. His voice did not waver. His facts were correct. His logic was sound. And slowly, the dismissive attitude in the chamber began to shift. The smaller species began to listen. Even some of the neutral Keshtar appeared interested. When David finished, he made a final statement. "Humans are new to this galaxy. We are primitive by your standards. But we know something about surviving against odds. We know that a society built on exploitation will eventually collapse. A society built on fairness might progress slowly, but it will survive and grow. I ask you to consider whether winning now is worth the cost of losing later." He stepped back to his observation post. The chamber was very quiet. Then Liana stood up. Everyone turned to look at her. The Etherean princess, the one they had ignored for 2 days, was standing. Her bioluminescent markings were glowing brightly, shining like small stars throughout the chamber. "I am Liana of the Etherean Collective," she said. Her voice was not loud, but the chamber was so quiet that every word could be heard clearly. "This agreement would destroy my people's economy. Over 20 cycles, we would lose everything that makes us independent. We would become servants in a system we did not create and cannot control." She held up her datapad. "I have the information to prove this. I have been preparing this analysis since I arrived at this summit. I did not speak before because I thought no one would listen to me. But the human Captain David showed me that sometimes you have to speak even when you are afraid that no one will hear you." Liana began to present her analysis. As she spoke, more information appeared on the chamber screens. She had worked for days on this material. She showed alternative trade models that would benefit all parties. She provided historical data about successful partnerships. She offered solutions that had been tested and proven effective. She finished with a statement that made several of the smaller species nod in recognition. The human captain said that justice is not about winning. Justice is about building something that lasts. My people asked the council to choose building over winning. We ask you to create an agreement that serves everyone. When she sat down, the chamber erupted. Delegates began shouting. Varth was suddenly angry, realizing that the comfortable agreement was falling apart. Commander Krell was staring at Liana with an expression that suggested he was recalculating his respect for the Etherean species. The other small species began to speak. The Mirith offered their own concerns. The Kelran voiced their fears. The Kelran had never spoken out loud in council before. This was unprecedented. The Keshtar leader issued a telepathic message that translated to a statement of willingness to mediate a new agreement that would be fair to all parties. Varth realized he was losing the support he needed. This is ridiculous, he said. The Varth withdraw our support for this agreement. Without the Varth and facing opposition from an expanding alliance of smaller species, the Tharan Empire had no choice. Commander Krell called for a vote. The agreement was rejected by a significant margin. The council announced that a new committee would be formed to create a fair trade agreement. The committee would be led by Princess Liana of the Etherians. After the session ended, David and Liana stood together in the corridor outside the chamber. Neither of them could quite believe what had happened. "You did that," David said to her. "You spoke the truth and changed the direction of history." Liana took his hand and held it firmly. "We did it," she said. "You reached for my hand when I was invisible. Now I can reach for the hands of others." From that moment forward, everything changed. Not instantly, not perfectly, but genuinely. The Overlooked had found their voice, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. News travels fast in the galactic community. Within hours, reports of the council chamber events spread across every major communication network. The human captain and the Etherian princess had challenged the established powers and won. It was a story that gave hope to every small species in the galaxy. It was also a story that made certain powerful beings very angry. Commander Krull was not accustomed to losing. The Tharn Empire had conquered its neighbors through superior military force. They took what they wanted, and no one had ever successfully resisted them. Now, a young alien princess and a primitive human had made them look weak in front of the entire galactic community. This was unacceptable. That night, Krull sent a private communication to Captain David Harrison. The meeting was requested at a neutral location, a private section of the station designated for confidential diplomatic talks. David considered not going, but he knew that ignoring a direct request from the Tharn commander might be taken as an insult. And insulting the Tharn Empire was not a wise choice for a new species trying to establish itself in galactic society. When David entered the meeting room, Commander Krull was waiting. The massive Tharn sat in a specially reinforced chair, his dark eyes fixed on David with an intensity that made it clear this was not a friendly conversation. "You have made a serious mistake today," Krull said. His voice was calm, which somehow made it more threatening than if he had shouted. "You have sided against a major power. You have humiliated the Tharn Empire. And you have encouraged rebellion among species that should know their place." David kept his face neutral. He had been trained in diplomatic protocol. Never show fear. Never show anger. Just listen and respond with facts. "I sided with fairness," David said. "The agreement you proposed was exploitative. It violated the founding principles of the Galactic Council. I was simply pointing out what was already true." Krull leaned forward slightly. "You are a young species. You have much to learn about how power actually works. I am willing to teach you. The Tharn Empire is prepared to offer humanity something valuable. We will become your allies. We will help you advance your technology. We will show you how to become strong and respected in this galaxy." David understood what was coming. This was an offer with a price attached. "In exchange," Krull continued, "you will withdraw your support for the Etherian Princess and the Small Species Coalition. You will acknowledge that the original agreement was just and reasonable. You will align yourself with the Tharn Empire and the Varth in future council matters." It was a bribe and a threat delivered simultaneously. Accept our offer and gain power. Refuse and face our anger. David took a moment before responding. He thought about Liana sitting alone in the gardens with tears on her face. He thought about the dismissal and cruelty he had witnessed in the council chamber. He thought about what his mother had taught him about choosing what was right, even when it was difficult. "I cannot accept your offer," David said. "I will not accept your offer. What we did in that chamber was right. The agreement was wrong. I will not pretend otherwise." Krull's expression did not change, but the tension in the room increased significantly. "Then you have chosen to be an enemy of the Tharn Empire. This is a poor decision for a young species that still needs to prove itself." David stood up. If standing against exploitation makes us enemies, then so be it. Humanity will prove itself through our principles, not through our willingness to betray them. He left the meeting before Krull could respond. David knew that he had just placed humanity in a precarious position. But he also knew that some choices had to be made regardless of the consequences. That same night, something far more serious happened to Princess Liana. She was in her quarters, resting after the intense day in the council chamber. Her room was modest but comfortable, located in the section of the station designated for visiting dignitaries. She had been reviewing data about potential fair trade agreements when her environmental system suddenly began to fail. The artificial atmosphere started to leak away. Alarms began to sound. Liana tried to reach the control panel, but the pressure in the room was dropping too quickly. She felt dizzy. Her vision began to darken. She was being pulled toward the open vent where the air was escaping. The safety protocols were supposed to seal the room automatically, but they did not activate. Something had disabled them. Just as Liana felt herself losing consciousness, emergency response teams arrived. They sealed the breach and restored the atmosphere. Liana survived, but barely. If the team had been even 30 seconds slower, she would have been lost to space. An investigation was launched immediately. The results were clear and undeniable. The environmental systems had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone had made it look like an accident, but the evidence showed intentional damage. Everyone in the station knew who was responsible. The Thoran Empire. It was a warning and a threat. Support the Etherians and face consequences. Word of the sabotage spread quickly. Some species began to distance themselves from the small species coalition. Fear is powerful. Fear of military might and retaliation is stronger than the desire for justice when survival is at stake. Several delegates who had been considering joining Liana's reform committee suddenly had urgent business back on their homeworlds. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking the coalition, the sabotage attempt strengthened it. The smaller species realized that they would be vulnerable and exploited no matter what they did. At least if they stood together, they had a chance. More importantly, David arrived at Liana's quarters as soon as he heard about the sabotage attempt. He found her sitting on her bed, physically unharmed but emotionally shaken. Her bioluminescent markings were dim with fear. David sat beside her and took her hand. "I know this is frightening," he said. "I know you are wondering whether it was worth it. But I need you to understand something. Fear is natural. It keeps us cautious and alive. But courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to do what is right even when you are afraid. And Liana, you are one of the most courageous beings I have ever known." Liana looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. "They tried to kill me because I spoke. My people are afraid now. Some of my advisors are telling me to go home, to stop fighting, to accept that we cannot challenge the powerful." David squeezed her hand gently. "Your people are afraid because they care about you and because they have been taught that resistance is hopeless. But you know better now. You know that speaking can change things. You know that small voices, when they unite, can reshape the galaxy." Liana took a breath. Her bioluminescent markings began to glow brighter. "You are right," she said. "I will not be silent. I will not abandon this work." The next morning, David and Liana went together to the council chamber. They brought evidence of the sabotage attempt. They presented it to the independent investigators who worked for the council. The evidence was overwhelming. The council voted to investigate the Thoran delegation. They froze the Thoran Empire's voting rights, pending the investigation. Commander Crow was ordered to remain on station until the investigation was complete. It was a significant victory. The larger powers had finally been held accountable. And it happened not because humans or Etherians were stronger than the Thorin, but because the rule of law and the testimony of witnesses had finally proven more powerful than military might dot as Liana and David left the council chamber. The other members of the small species coalition approached them. They wanted to talk about the reforms. They wanted to offer their support. They wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. The invisible princess and the insignificant human captain had become the catalysts for change. And the galaxy was beginning to realize that it had underestimated both of them terribly. The final week of the summit was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever experienced. The traditional power structures that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of cycles were being completely restructured. Where once the major military powers had decided everything, now representatives from every species had a voice in the process. Princess Liana chaired the Reform Committee. She worked from early morning until late night, meeting with delegates from dozens of different species. She listened to their concerns. She documented their suggestions. She created frameworks for fair representation that would protect smaller species without completely removing the influence of larger ones. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply meaningful. The Etherian delegation had grown as more of Liana's people arrived at the station. They came because they wanted to support her. They came because they realized that their careful nature and their focus on creating fair systems was exactly what the galaxy needed. The Etherians began to design new trade protocols and diplomatic agreements. Their quiet competence impressed even the most skeptical delegates. Captain David Harrison worked alongside them. The human contingent on the station grew as Earth sent additional personnel to support the emerging changes. David found that humans were particularly good at what they called bridge building. They could understand the perspective of aggressive species like the Thorin, while also having genuine concern for vulnerable species like the Etherians. This unusual combination of qualities made humans valuable mediators, but more importantly, humans became known for something else. They became known for fighting for what was right even when it was difficult. They became known for seeing people others overlooked and insisting that those people mattered. This reputation, built on the actions of David and his crew, began to change how the galaxy perceived humanity. The new trade equity agreement that emerged from the summit was unlike anything that had ever been proposed before. Every species had contributed to it. The smaller powers had protections built in to prevent exploitation. The larger powers maintained enough influence to feel that their concerns were being heard. It was not perfect, but it was fair. When the document was finalized and ready for the vote, Liana asked David to review it one final time. He sat in the observation area, reading through hundreds of pages of complex diplomatic language. By the time he finished, his eyes were tired and his mind was exhausted. But he was also impressed. "It is beautiful," he told Liana. "You took all the competing interests and actually created something that works for everyone." Liana nodded. "I took what you showed me and applied it across the entire structure. I acknowledged everyone. I made sure every voice was heard. I refused to let the powerful silence the weak. That is what you taught me." The vote was called, and the agreement passed with overwhelming support. Even some of the delegates who had initially opposed the reforms voted in favor. The Varth, seeing that the agreement still allowed for profit and trade, supported it. The Thorin, now facing reduced influence due to their sabotage attempt, had no choice but to accept it. But the most important moment came when the Keshtar Collective issued a unified telepathic message that translated to a profound statement. The Keshtar, who had always chosen neutrality, declared their support for the new system. They said that true peace came not from avoiding difficult decisions, but from making fair ones, even when they were complex. On the final night of the summit, Liana and David stood together on the observation deck of the station. The galactic expanse spread out before them, thousands of star systems glowing in the darkness. Somewhere out there was Earth, David's home world. Somewhere else was Etheria, Liana's world of blue oceans and crystal forests. Two worlds that had never been connected now shared history and purpose. They did not speak for a long time. They simply stood together, watching the universe. Finally, David turned to Liana and said, "I have to return to Earth. I need to report what has happened here. I need to help our government understand what is coming." Liana nodded, though her bioluminescent markings dimmed slightly with sadness. "I understand. I must return to my people as well. They will want to hear about the reforms. They will want to begin implementing the new agreements." David reached out and took Liana's hand. This was more than comfort now. This was something deeper. "But I do not want our connection to end," he said. "These past days have shown me something I did not know was possible. It has shown me that connection between beings from different worlds is not just possible. It is necessary. The galaxy needs more of this. More people reaching across the spaces between them. More beings seeing each other instead of looking away." Liana looked at their joined hands. In Etherian culture, the joining of hands between two individuals meant something profound. It meant that they were bonding their purposes and their fates. It meant that they would support each other across any distance. "Among my people, we have something called heart bonding," Liana said. "It is what happens when two beings share values so fundamental and so true that they become forever connected. They do not need to be in the same place. They do not need to speak every day. The bond itself carries their presence across all distance. I believe that we have formed such a bond, David. I believe we are heart-bonded." David stepped closer to her. "I do not have a word from Earth that means exactly what you are describing, but I understand what you are saying. And yes, I feel it too. No matter where we are, no matter how far apart our worlds are, we are connected now." They stood that way on the observation deck, their hands holding the promise of a continued connection that transcended space and worlds and the normal boundaries that kept being separate. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects of what had happened at the summit began to spread across the galaxy. The new trade equity agreement was ratified by every major species. Committees formed to implement its protocols. The smaller species began to experience fair treatment for the first time in recorded history. More importantly, something changed in how galactic society viewed itself. Species began to see that their diversity was not a weakness to be managed. Their diversity was a strength. Different perspectives led to better solutions. Different values created checks on unlimited power. When all voices were heard, the system became stronger. Captain David Harrison returned to Earth and presented a complete report to human leadership. He described the Etherian princes who have found her voice. He described how human principles of justice and compassion had made a difference in galactic politics. And he recommended that humanity invest more heavily in cultural exchange and diplomatic work throughout the galaxy. His recommendations were accepted. Humanity began to establish cultural exchanges with other species. Humans were sent to learn from advanced civilizations. Representatives from other species came to Earth to understand what made humans value compassion and justice so highly. Liana returned to Etheria and shared all that she had learned with her people. She showed them that quiet observation and careful analysis were powerful tools. She demonstrated that Etherians could take their place among galactic powers not by becoming aggressive or warlike, but by offering what they did best: wisdom, fairness, and a commitment to understanding. The Etherian collective became known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic skill and their ability to create just systems. More Etherians were appointed to important positions. More species came to seek their counsel, and across the vast distances between their worlds, Liana and David maintained their heart bond. They sent messages through the quantum communication networks. They shared their experiences and their hopes. They supported each other through difficulties and celebrated each other's victories. The story of the shy alien princess and the human captain who reached for her hand became legendary. It was told and retold across 1,000 worlds. Young beings heard the story and realized that they did not have to accept injustice, that they could speak even when they were afraid, that reaching out to someone overlooked could change the entire course of history. Years later, when historians looked back on the transformation of galactic society, they pointed to that moment in the botanical gardens. A human captain and an Etherean princess. Two beings that no one had expected to matter. Two beings that the powerful had dismissed and ignored. But sometimes, the most important changes in the universe come not from the powerful and the confident. They come from those who dare to reach across the spaces that separate them. They come from those who see someone overlooked and refuse to look away. They come from beings brave enough to say that compassion matters, that fairness matters, that every voice, no matter how soft, deserves to be heard. And in a galaxy full of ancient powers and established hierarchies, this simple truth proved to be the most revolutionary force of all.